but he doesn't do funny things like this. He draws boxes. But but he's very fond of this house, and I think it shows that some people say it shows he hated the house, that's why he draws boxes. But if you talk to him, you'll know he doesn't hate it at all. He's very fond of it. But he says, I just have to draw what I can feel, and that's an honest, his honest way of doing. And I don't know if he'll do it all his life, but anyway, that's what he's doing right now. That's another Baptist church. 3 half spheres with pendentives inside are glass in between there. This is the model of the Crystal Chapel I designed for the University of Oklahoma in 1949. And it was an attempt to do something for non-denominational use, where the main idea was it'd have a feeling of being a sacred building that would take care of any kind of religion that would be using it. But it's Oklahoma pink granite with stainless steel frame and glass sandwiches for the roof, with insulation between of spun glass and insulation by reflection also. And then the building for the religious activities was over at the other side there, freestanding building. The university accepted the design and were very anxious to do it. A man had promised them the funds for it, owned a big chain of department stores in Oklahoma City and other places. But when his son found out he was giving away that much money, he had him committed in order to get the money himself. So the university wasn't able to build it. But since then, there have been a number of people trying to build it. In fact, one of the most recent ones was a group of blacks who wanted to build it as a memorial for Martin Luther King. So there's still attempts being made by various colleges and places to try to build it, even after all these years. Interior, the choir's in the center, sunk down below so the sound rises up from there. This is a house for a very conservative attorney in Houston, and it was built for him and his wife and 2 sons. The sons talked him into having me do this. After they left, got their schooling finished and left home, then that left this house for him and his wife, and they liked it, but there was a big yard to take care of, and they were getting older, so they wanted to sell it and have a condominium where they wouldn't have to worry about the yard. And they didn't want to sell it to anyone who wouldn't appreciate it, so they finally wound up selling it to a Chinese family named G, and they needed more space, so we added considerably to it. I don't have the finished slides. They're just being made now. But we just completed this repersonalization, you might call it, of the house. People often say, if you design a house for a certain client, how could anyone else use it if it had to be sold? Well, right now we are repersonalizing several of our houses that's happened to. And so the Chinese family told me if there was anything I wanted to do on the house that the other owner wouldn't have liked or wouldn't have approved of or didn't have the money for, to do it. And they said, if we don't have the money, we'll get it. So that's a pretty good kind of client, too. The house has to take care of quite a large family group because there are about 80 people in Houston that are part of that family, relatives, I mean, on her side and his. And it's about like Grand Central Station there a lot of times with coming and going. And the kitchen that was originally planned to handle 4 to 6 people, say, generally, suddenly has to do constant duty, almost day and night, for cooking and so on. But this is the house in its original state. These windows extend up above the roof with this dome shape, so you can see the tree up into the trees instead of just looking at their legs. This house is in Jacksonville, Florida, and it has a sort of a convolution plan that goes back and around and back out. The St. John River right back of it's 4 miles wide, and it's wide enough to sail battleships up into there. So they wanted to look out over that and have the privacy in front with very little glass. We use scrap marble for this lower portion of the wall. The closet above is wood. Glass up above, that's all set without metal or wood members. Thiacol used to hold it together. This house is for a banker in Kansas City, and it's made up of 8 octagons, 1 for each of the rooms, and the central space is a large octagonal space. And they all have skylights, which cuts down a great deal on the overhead for the light. And the lily pond on this side and the opposite end of the house has a swimming pool. Inside the central space, you come up from the entrance level halfway between the lower floor and this main floor. And the same shingles are used inside as out. They wanted a big pit instead of having a lot of separate furniture items. There goes one of the inhabitants. These are ashtrays in this door, but being he's a banker, these cost $35 a piece. This is a play tower that we did for Mr. Price's mother to give to the children out in the park at Bartlesville. And the tower, mainly, it had to be something that didn't have to be supervised or locked up at night or something. There's a big sandbox 50 feet in diameter, and then the stairway's metal, so they can make all the racket they want on it, work off steam, and there's an observation level up at the top. And this form at the left here is a Mebus strip crawler, we call it, which is the form, I think you know, that's a continuous surface. And this is very puzzling to the kids, and they like to play on it. They say, well, I'll stand, it's in action here now. See, one kid says, I'll stand here, and to his friend he says, you get on the other side, I'll stay where I am, but you keep coming around and don't crawl over, but you keep going and you'll be on the same side I'm on, except you'll be upside down. This sounds completely wacky, and they try it, and if they do fall when they're upside down, they just fall in the sand, doesn't hurt them, but they're so amazed that this happens, and they try to get their parents to explain how. Even the man who made it still can't figure out how come it makes one surface and one edge, because he made it. He says, I know there are two sides to that fence. It's a chain link fence. He says, I know there are two sides. I made it, and where'd it go? It is a lot of fun for them to play with. The fencing's put all around it, so if they fall, they can't hurt themselves. The little kids use it in daytime, and the teenagers say it's knocking in orbit. This is a house in Gulfport, Mississippi, and it's a triangular space where the children have their part of the house and the parents theirs. And it's up on a frame above the ground about 15 feet. Not just because it floods there, because it floods very little, but they wanted the view out to the right and to the left. The street's parallel with this. And when I was down talking to the builder that wanted to build the house, you saw the plan that's shaped that way, in Jacksonville, he asked me how I was going to go home, and I said, what do you mean? He says, are you going along the coast? And I said, yes. He says, well, you ought to stop by Gulfport. And he said, they got something there that you seem to like these odd things, and he said, something there you might like to see. I said, what's that? And he says, well, they say it's a house. And I said, well, is it or not? And he says, well, I guess it is. They live in it. But he said, it's not like any house you ever saw. And I said, well, what do you mean? And he said, it's up off the ground. And I said, well, that's nothing new. That's been done for centuries, a long, long time, all over the world. He said, yes, but there's nothing holding this one up. And I said, there must be something holding it up. And he says, well, as a matter of fact, they do have helium tanks down underneath there. And I said, well, then what keeps it from going away? He says, they got some little things on underneath that hold it down. So there's an idea that's of the structure of the house. Not correct, of course. But it's a steel frame, we used we wanted to get as small a foundation to it as we could because the water table was so close to the surface. We had to pump it out as fast as we put the concrete in. But it survived 2 very bad hurricanes that demolished the houses on both sides. Everyone said this would be the first one to go. But I think the fact that it was up off the ground helped equalize the pressure up and down on it, and it let the things keep on moving. It didn't have much resistance vertical area to stop try to stop the hurricane, usually, which of course be almost impossible to stop it anyway, but there wasn't much resistance to it, the flow of it, I mean. The steel truss is given a 3-dimensional strength by having these closet forms made into it. You can walk outdoors from any of the rooms up on the main floor. You're not just caged in once you get up there. That's a scheme for a house. A man named John Quincy Adams, and he owned a radio station in this town. We had to build him another house because he sold the radio station before we got very far with this one, and so I had to change the character of the house to go with the other side. Sometimes the same family, the same town, or the same area, but a site maybe only 50 feet from the one you start with will make you change the whole plan if you're working with trees or with certain physical conditions that way. This one lost me a lot of friends. But this was done for a family also on the Gulf Coast, which who wanted to have curves. They liked them more than angles or squares or anything, and so we used curves. The other thing was they wanted their house violet color, and the water garden here has a bridge crossing it for the entrance, and you go up to the balcony level and down to the main level. These tile cones are structural at the corner. They also make balconies off of each of the bedrooms if you want to be serenaded. That's about the biggest slope on the west coast, or on the Gulf Coast, I mean. They call it Davidson Hills. These cones reverse at the back where the grounds drop down, and they become dog houses there. There's a workshop in between the porch fiberglass screen. Entrance. Jenks has a ball over this, of course. This is good stuff for these people that see faces, you know. This is the back of the upper part of the fireplace. Here's where you go down and go up to the balcony for the bedrooms. That's where we came in up there. Here's another kind of place. This is out in the western plains of Oklahoma, the Panhandle, where they say you can see further than anywhere in the see further and see less than anywhere in the U.S. And it's true. The landscape is about like that in all directions. Anything you build there counts a great deal, and so you have to use fairly strong color and form if you want to see it from any distance, because it's lost in that big space, of course. Very few trees, but you can use a stronger color and form there than you probably would in town with more modest houses and colors around. These people wanted to use the revolving closets too. I've used that a number of times when the client wants them. They revolve inside like these clothes rack affairs. You get a lot more space for storage, and you don't need an opening over about this wide. You see, where wardrobe types you need all across the side of the room uses up space. You can also use these in corners where you always have a problem what to do with them. And the main living room is up on top. Her studio's in this end of the house. It's just the framework glazed. When you're doing something that's a little different from usual, they penalize you some on the cost, so we have to do details that are simpler to execute and save some of the money that way to pay for the thing being different. This is a house for a farmer in Minnesota. It was designed with an outdoor-indoor carpet roof. It has the orange color, and you notice the masonry is made up of granite boulders. And the glaciers came across those prairies in early days and left these all over the land. The farmers will give you all you want free. Of course, they're very heavy. But this was before the swimming pool was put in. This space was left for it here. But at the time this was shown, it was taken, it wasn't in yet. This is the approach to the house from the farm. And they call this service building, the kids call this service building over at the side the Alamo. And that's where the snowmobiles and the wood storage and shop and workroom and all that sort of thing is. And the top deck is for parties and stuff when they want to have a big affair out there of some kind. This courtyard hasn't been finished yet, but it will be. You connect over to the left with the entrance from the county road. The three-car garage, there are two entrances, one for the farm entrance here and guest entrance on the other side. There's a screen porch up there. These are 6x6 rough undressed cedar with thermopane. This was all done by local labor. Yes? I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
I just want to know if you're addressing solar issues. I think you are, but I know if you can point those out.
Did you hear him?
You want to know if you have
Solar energy.
You're talking about solar energy.
Oh yes, we always think of, long before it was fashionable. You have to think of it, and maybe it's called passive now, but we do use the thermopane, and the wood itself is good insulation in that thickness. But that we do use the wood deck is insulation itself, and then we have additional insulation above that. And it's a thing that you have to always consider, and I think most architects have considered it, that care for it, careful about houses and feeling the need to do that. But all of these houses are pretty carefully insulated and orientated with the sun and all these things. This balcony along the west side here, for instance, has an overhang above it to shade it from the intense sun, and still have the view, you see. We dropped it down low to give it plenty of shade. There's 6 fireplaces in this house, and it didn't take long in this little town, 2,500 people, for the rumor to get around that there were 16. And then the next rumor was that there were 16 fireplaces because the architect was an elderly man who had never heard of central heating. It's in Minnesota at Mountain Lake. It's in the southwestern part of the state. When we started to build it, it was 47 below zero. And they actually worked in that temperature. I didn't think they'd even try it then, but they're used to winter construction. This house will be shown in, I think it's scheduled for the May issue of Architectural Digest. There'll be some other pictures of it in there, this coming one. There's one of the entrance doors. There are 2, one on the opposite end, the other end there. This is done by placing this material between 2 pieces of plate glass and sealing it as thermopane. And I made the design while I was up there on an inspection trip. Actually made it there, and we had it sealed in a factory very close to there. Oops. This is the kitchen and the fireplace. See part of the farm out there. The fire screens, and the andirons and the wood holders are all made out of rebars, reinforcing bars. This fireplace I made for the owner's bedroom. It's a flex mirror tile. That's the living room fireplace. a big rock at the right-hand end weighed 3,000 pounds. Mr. Harder had some heavy lifting equipment. He could get these rocks and put them in place comparatively easily. Speakers are on these poles so they can be directional if you want to change them towards the dining area. This is still part of the living room. The seat for listening to music, record players and tape decks are in there. Up above is the back of the seat. The carpet comes along under, makes the ceiling of the entrance hall partway down, wraps up around the back of the seat there. The porch opens off the other way on that side. This is one of the mirror mosaics. We had very good workmanship in this little town. No unions or anything, but good skills. Another one of the mosaics on these flower boxes. It's a fireplace in one of the recreation areas. This is a painting I did for Mrs. Harder. Mr. Harder commissioned me to do it. It's a four-way painting, so it's meant to show from any one of the sides. You can make it vertical, either end up, or horizontal, either side up. So you get 4 for the price of 1 that way. Their parents wanted me to do them a house, and they were 75 years old then. And they're Mennonites. He's Norwegian, she's German. And this is their house. Her sewing room's up above there. We used the fish scale shingles. One of the things she wanted, a bay window. Could you have a bay window on one of your houses? And I said, you can have 4 on this one if you want them. So she has 4. Her sewing room is up here where she can eyes on the neighbors on 4 directions, you see. And she's a marvelous cook. But she's quite an interesting gal, and the husband too. Word got around town he's having a circular house. Well, that's always a shock, usually. And then the next shock was that when they went out to look at the place, the beginning of it, the foundation, there was a square foundation, you see, and a basement. They said, we thought you were going to build a roundhouse. He says, well, we are. We are building a roundhouse. And they said, well, how come you put a square foundation in a round house? He says, you always do. And that satisfied him. I mean, the question, if you always do it, it's okay. I would never have thought of that answer, you know, but I thought it was a pretty good one. Good way to handle it. I have quite a kick building. And at their age, you know, it's a little bit late, but this is the living room of Hyde House in Kansas City, Missouri. He's an eye surgeon, very famous one. I just had this one slide with me, so I thought I'd just show you that. I've been asked to show some of my paintings, and I've been painting as long as I've been doing architecture or whatever. And so this was a series that's based on a poem by Arthur Rimbaud called The Drunken Boat. And I started this back before World War II, the series. And then that came along. I'd only made 5 of the 25, and so then I was never able to get back into it. I was always busy about something else. And finally, one day Joe Press got to looking through my paintings, and he said he recognized these were quite different from what I usually had been doing. He said, "What are these?" And I told him. He says, "Why don't you finish the series?" And I said, "Well, I work and have to live." He said, "Well, if I commission you to finish the rest of them, would you do it?" And I said, "Yes." We finished the rest of them, picked up after all those years and finished them. But these are, you notice that I call them accompaniments. They're not illustrations of the poem as much as they are accompanying the poem. Like you might have music accompanying a poem or vice versa. And so there are 24 sections. So each of the sections have a different kind of character, and I tried to accompany that in the mood, into these separate paintings. And they're in this sequence. This is the first one. And I can't try to tell you about it because it's written in French, and I can't speak French. And the translations of it, I have 4 of them, and none of them agree. And his poetry was written not only for the meaning of the words, but the usual meanings of the words, but for their decorative effect and for their overtones and double meanings and so on. So the French people have a pretty tough time with it themselves. But he did this poem when he was quite young, and I think he quit writing poetry after he became very famous. I think he was about in his late 30s when he quit writing altogether, which was too bad because he had some amount of talent. But most of these scenes deal with water, and you have the feeling that this story, the Drunken Boat, means that this boat is, it's not the same boat even all the time apparently, but a boat it has all these experiences of traveling in different places, exotic and different places, and all of these various experiences, and that the whole thing adds up to the notion that once you experience all these different kinds of beauty and nature and so on, that you have to keep on going, even though you may be very weary and very tired, that you can't give it up. You're hooked on it, in other words, as we would say now. It's something that you're committed to, and there's nothing much you can do about it. Some of the passages are stormy, some are more peaceful, various kinds of things. These are watercolors. This section divides right in two in the same section, where from a stormy part to a very radiant part. This has a rather surrealist character in the poem. One that's lighter and dancing. Oops. The only part which seems to be autobiographical in it is where he's telling about a little boy playing with a paper boat out at night. It suggests he might mean himself as a kid, you know. The last part is where there's nothing to do but keep going on, of course. But in this particular one, I showed the ship this time as one Joe Price bought from Sterling Hayden, one of the sail ships, which later, about 30 days after I painted this, crashed on the shores of down in Tahiti, near Tahiti. The captain's understudy was practicing and ran it into a reef. But that was sort of coincidence that this would be shown in here. And one of Joe's most personal, private, and prized possessions was this ship, and he just loved it. He used to go out and take his friends out and they'd sail around on it. So that's why I put that ship in there. This is a series that's also accompanying music this time. As Debussy's La Mer. It's in 3 sections. The first part's called From Dawn Till Noon on the Sea. And it's this much of it. Then the whole painting is composed of 3 parts because the music is. The second part of the music is called The Sport of the Waves, or Games of the Waves, more like a scherzo or playful. And the last part's called The Dialogue of the Wind and the Sea. And then they're thought of all together as a composition this way. It's about 12 feet long. And the whole thing was to not only relate with the feeling of the music, but also with the continuity of the 3 parts of it. And to whatever is going on in a translucent or transparent way is always clearly shown through it. There's nothing covered up in it. It's all, even though there's a lot of depth in it, it still all reads through the orchestration of it. And so this was a problem I set for myself in that, which is in the music itself. And speaking of this first part, which he called From Dawn Till Noon on the Sea, Satie, his friend, you probably have heard of as the composer of Gymnopédies and so on, was quite a wit. And he said he particularly liked that section along about 11:25. The section of the music, there was, I mean, From Dawn Till Noon, it was up near the end of that part. These are just various aspects of it from different angles. Of course, there's a lot of rhythmic counterpoint going on. This house is for one of my clients now, Mr. Struckus, and it's a painting he commissioned me to do. He's an expert woodworker, and he'd seen some of my work and asked me to do this for him. This is not a very good background to show it on. It was outdoors against a wall, but it's a essay in hard edge painting, where instead of the blending together more, it's very sharp and distinct. These are details of various parts of it. Here's another painting I've done the last few years here in 2 parts, sort of like a folding screen would be. This is the left-hand portion and the right-hand portion. Now, the last thing we're going to look at is a very unusual thing, in that it's very seldom an architect has the opportunity to do a house that keeps up with the changing life of the client over a period of 25 years, say. And usually you finish the package and they live in it or somebody else does. But this house started out as a bachelor pad for Joe Price. At the time, he was a sort of a playboy. He had no particular interest in art. He did like to do photography. He was very good at that. And he particularly liked to photograph pretty girls. But and he'd traveled all over the world already, in various places in Africa and Asia and other places, making these marvelous pictures of the natives. But he had never been to Japan at that time. And so his problem was to have a house. He said quote, he didn't want it to be an imitation married people's house by having a regular kitchen, parlor, bedroom, and bath arrangement, sort of. But he wanted a large space that he could entertain his friends in, as many as 75 sometimes. And other times he didn't want it to seem empty when he was there by himself. So he didn't want to have a lot of empty furniture sitting around, reminding you that it was church and nobody came, you see. So this was a problem then, where the house had to be furniture as well as being a house. And so this was the way we tackled it. The first house was the bachelor pad. He called it his pad himself. And so here was the central portion, and it had the three main functions: the entrance, the carport, storage for cameras, and all of that, and coats and all in the beginning, where you go in. Over to the right was the bedroom and bathroom and dressing area. And over at the upper left was the buffet kitchen and place to eat, and inside or outside. And there was a porch down below. You could go down to, screened in, and a barbecue terrace out beyond that. So, and then there was a pit just off center in the house, where people who wanted a seat with a back to it or something could sit. And there was a bar in the center of that. And the outside walls, he wanted to live on the floor. And so it isn't comfortable to sit on a horizontal floor and a vertical wall right back of you. But so we leaned the walls out where this would happen. And then the floor needed to be white because he said he didn't want shadows under these faces, you see, and he wanted reflected light, and white would do that. And so we thought about it and decided to make it all white carpet. And this would be comfortable with a pad about this thick, and the carpet's about that thick, so you don't walk across it, you wade through it. And there is part of the floor that's vinyl if somebody wants to dance or something. And then the masonry that you see, these two sets of shapes that form the closets here and the bathroom and the kitchen contain the principal structural element of the house. That's coal masonry again, to go with the black, to go with the white. And we used a gold anodized roof for the aluminum, gold anodized aluminum roof. And the walls that lean outward are all gold anodized aluminum. So this was the first stage. And at that time, he didn't particularly want a manicured yard, as he called it. He liked the plants that were there. And this barbecue terrace is up above here. You see the walls leaning outward, and the roof is both gold. It was difficult to get the tree up there. They broke several A-frames to get it up, but it finally was managed. And here we have the porch and the carport at the far end. There are 3 big beams that carry through the house, and they terminate with these lanterns outside. This shows some of the wildflowers and the view of the terrace out here. This is the carport. This is the winter scene. The sky was behaving nicely here, I think. Many people ask me why these points are sticking out of the top. Well, there are 2 reasons. A friend of mine always says there's always 2 or more reasons. One's the real reason, and one's the reason. So you can call either one of these whichever you want to, but they're both reasons anyway. One reason was that we needed them and needed something for lightning rods, because the place gets hit with electricity about every time there's a big electrical storm. It's up on a hill there, and there are many electrical storms there. Then they're grounded, of course. The other reason is that aesthetically, I felt that without that extension into the sky, that it would be a silhouette of the house against the sky rather than with the sky. And by taking it out into the sky and bringing the sky into those spaces, it would be more integral with the sky and the house, you see, bringing them together that way. And I think if you saw the house without those, you'd see very easily that they do help to bring those 2 together.